You're the libertarian of theology. Get out of here. I'm glad I'm so much more saved. And yeah, that's a position, or ironically, or coincidentally, I guess the word would be, that would not be an affirmative position from Orthodoxy. Yet it is from saved, always saved. I'm closer, this kind of thing. More saved. I'm closer to, I'm closer to realized Christianity, or like I'm above the status here. Let's get a logician on, shall we? Maybe Dark Aesthetics, you can jump on and ask questions as well, so we can have some back and forth. Hello, Father Deacon Ananias. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
Good. I can. Is there anything you want to comment that I've been discussing, or you want to talk about a specific topic?
The paraconsistent logic.
Okay.
What cracks me up is that we had this episode today in class, in epistemology class, and we're going over sense datum theory, and it's actually quite difficult. But so a student goes to an example in quantum mechanics, and we all had to laugh because it was like, all right, we're already in something really difficult. So you're going to go to something even more obscure and difficult.
Right.
And controversial. I feel like that's like with paraconsistent logic too, that that's an extremely controversial and not universally accepted. Why would we go something like that to clarify?
Right.
That's that's my first kind of impression. Also, with dialetheism, if you look at the cases and the way that make it seem, it's really not what people think it is. But all we have to do is say, okay, suppose that it actually is true and maps onto the world somehow and it's normative. There's still going to be necessary conditions for that. And so it's not a refuter to tag or orthodoxy. That if it turns out, let's say, this really obscure, weird thing that hardly anybody accepts turns out to be true, how is that a defeater for orthodoxy?
Well, yeah, it wouldn't be, because, to even come to that conclusion, you still haven't tackled everything that's necessary for you to even investigate paraconsistent logic, any other fuzzy logic that people like to bring up in, honestly, let's be honest, these only get brought up in these sort of like corner of the internet Discord, high technical philosophy and logic servers, where in the end, there's no real application. Like you said, the guy who brought it up seems like a good sport. He was saying, well, it's consistent, but what was the definition I just brought up? It basically says that it's a type of logic that allows for coexistence of contradictory statements without leading to logical explosion. In other words, a way of reasoning with inconsistent information without reaching absurd conclusions. The question is, okay, should we pursue that or not? I mean, you don't get rid of this urge or this value of pursuing the truth and applying it in some way in the world. So I always ask them, I just grant all this. Even if you didn't want to internally critique paraconsistent logic and you just granted everything they say, you're still left with, okay, should we use it? And for what, right? It doesn't get rid of the purpose. Like, does it have any teleology? Like, or is it, like Jay says, is it just teleological? Like, a lot of things end up being teleological.
And I think, too, it's formed for particular cases that might come up in which it doesn't actually seem like an either or law of non-contradiction would apply to particular cases. So this really kind of misses the issue. Those are particular cases. It might be, I'll just, like you say, granted, it might be useful. It might actually help with particular individual cases. But we're asking a meta-epistemological, metalogical question. So it just misses that entirely. Can you actually, like it said, is it going to be explosive? Can it actually reflexively refer and apply that principle, you see it would be self-defeating, because are we talking about paraconsistent logic or not? Can we be talking about paraconsistent logic in the same way and not at the same time? So at a meta level, it would be self-stultifying. So I think paraconsistent logic, why they call it paraconsistent and not explosive, is for that. They're not saying it applies to everything. So at a meta-epistemological level, you analyze this. It's not a defeater for, like, again, tag or anything like that, because we're doing meta-epistemological analysis and questions.
Well, the other question I would have is, would you use paraconsistent logic to dissect paraconsistent logic, or would you be using something else, right?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't, right? Because you wouldn't use that system to then do what you call metalogical analysis, because you'd already accept that, well, there could be contradictions. So doing the analysis of paraconsistent logic, you're already outside, standing at a different vantage point. Would you say that's you're back into the classical way of using logic?
And whatever. I mean, think about this too. Logic, in one sense, is a system, a formal system derived from real realities and categories and relations in the world, as far as it applies to both the mind and the world. We can mess up on the system that we build, right? So when people get so focused on the logic, it's like, but in one sense, when we're doing a meta-epistemological, we're asking, what is this actually grounded on? There's something further in the logical and kind of epistemological analysis than the actual system that a man builds or something as a science to study the rules of thought in the world and stuff like that.
Right.
But they treat it like it's absolute. Isn't it funny? In one sense, they want to deny that, but like the system itself, and you saw this from your stream yesterday, they take science and absolutize it and give it properties of the deity.
Oh yeah, well, the world itself too, right? Like they go in either direction. Like they deify science and the aggregation of a bunch of descriptive claims, even though they admit they could never get to the highest resolution, fully exhaustive descriptions of the world itself. And then you could go the more, I guess, the pagan or monistic approach, where you kind of make the world or the universe itself the necessary being. I don't know if you're aware of Graham Oppy. He's making sort of popular this. He's doing a tag argument, but not for God. He's doing it for just being, but an impersonal being called an initial state. So he takes all of the argumentation methods from a Christian that they would do, necessary preconditions, what justifies all of these things, and he just creates an initial state that exists, but can't be described the way you describe every following state. I even asked someone this. Yeah, go ahead.
You pointed out in your last stream, when people make this kind of false dialectic between faith and reason, and you pointed out, well, everybody has presuppositions and puts faith in something, right? So, I mean, otherwise you have this kind of Munchausen trilemma, or, it goes back indefinitely. I have no reason for any of my reasons. So ultimately, of course, like you see Graham Oppy, like at least he realizes, and most people do when they're, who are highly educated in these areas, that I need a necessary condition, right? And by which I don't give another argument for, but is the condition for the possibility of
a non-dependent condition, right?
And I trust in that. Now, so then the question is, then when we do an analysis on this, well, does your condition, your necessary precondition, do the work that you want it to do? Everybody has faith in something. It grounds out in faith. All reason, in fact, reason takes faith in its own reasonableness. So we need to see, well, what actually does the work and what doesn't.
And this becomes the question, like you've covered in many talks, the difference between autonomous and theonomous, right? Ultimately, it just comes down to there's no, even if you tried, could you give a third option to that? Or is it a true dilemma there between the two? Is there, I can't fathom a third option to those two. Can you explain for the audience what just shortly autonomous and theonomous?
Yes.
The distinction.
Autonomous would be from my own sphere of reason. alone, without any appeal to something like God and his revelation, can I create an epistemological system that grounds and gives a coherent account for knowledge? So I'm doing it autonomously versus recognizing a necessary dependence in order to do that, which would be theonomous.
Right. And so the difference in methods, would you say it's accurate to say an autonomous position would have to entail that it's not being discovered, it's being sort of crafted? Because once you say it's discovered, isn't it no longer technically, it can't be autonomous? Or unless you're saying something out there could be discovered and you could use your reasoning, but it's only your reasoning alone, and you just try to match up with other people who reason the same way, and you build
Well, I
this sort of
think they're going to want, like, well, obviously there's an objective world and there's objective laws. I mean, assuming these people aren't just total retards and relativists.
Yeah.
They'll say, well, ultimately the objective metaphysics, whatever that may be, will be discovered. But the problem is, as I show, this ends up becoming either an arbitrary or contradictory or inconsistent kind of program when, but I have to start with my reason alone. So let me put it this way. People ask, well, which ones comes first, metaphysics or epistemology? And it depends. In one sense, in the real order of things, clearly metaphysics, the structures of the universe and the laws and stuff like that, objectively speaking, determine what, how, and whether you can know. So metaphysics in that sense comes first. The problem is I have all these different metaphysical accounts. One guy's telling me it looks like this. One guy tells me it looks like this. So I have to put my epistemological cart before my metaphysical horse. And then I have to know before I can actually know, in order to know which metaphysics is true to give an account for how I know. That problem occurs because of autonomous epistemology. Within my starting point of my own reason alone, in the sphere of reason alone, I can't solve these problems. I can't give it a coherent account of, or I contradict myself, or I'm involved in vicious circularity, bootstrapping, all these different issues that by people's own terms aren't allowed in their system. So what I like to point out is this isn't something that's just like, well, I have to like buy and believe in orthodoxy and its own arbitrary rules. But like, no, those are your rules too. That's what I said. Like, can your project do what it wants it to do?
Okay. So Enslaved by Truth asks, how does one not use autonomous reasoning to come to these conclusions?
You hand over the problem to one who's in a position to know who doesn't have this problem. So I think one of the most people get, a lot caught up on my more kind of recent technical papers on this. But I think the foundation to really kind of understand this is my paper, an earlier paper I wrote called The Apophatic Ascent to the Divine, in which you realize your position that alone I can't actually solve this problem. And it's because of my finitude, right? It's because, whether I want to go over the problem of induction or just these epistemological problems, I'm limited. I'm not omnipotent. I'm not omniscient. I'm not transcendent. I don't have as epistemologists always say, a God's eye kind of point of view. And so what theonomous then is to, as an act of humility, going, I can't accomplish it. And you hand over the epistemological project that you can't actually solve to God. And God, right, gives you a life, right? He gives you an account through revelation of how all these things are grounded. And he is the only one in a position that could actually, by definition of who he is.
So Enslaved by Truth is Catholic. So wouldn't he already be appealing to generally what you're saying anyway? Like already by even appealing to the Catholic
I think what he's getting confused is, I'm not saying you don't use reasoning, right? Autonomous reasoning means with thinking that you could pull these things off without God actually even existing. So I would say even in Roman Catholic, kind of like Thomistic natural theology and stuff like that, it all admits that, well, I could reason and come to these conclusions and be justified or give even a coherent account of knowledge, even if God doesn't exist. We just come to find out that he exists later through my system, my autonomous system that I built, which ultimately Aquinas then will say, well, of course that's grounded by God. But let's make clear, we're not saying that theonomous epistemology is not fideism. Let's define fideism, right? It's not simply do you have to take faith in things, because everybody does. Fideism would be set contrary to you shouldn't use reason at all. What we're doing here is how do we, at a meta level, account, ground, and justify the existence of reason? That has to be handed over to theonomists. Once that's done, of course we reason. We have an account for that. We have a grounding and justification.
He says, so the knowledge of God being the needed precondition for knowledge is just being.
You thought it sounded like fideism.
Well, yeah, no, he just clarified that. But enslaved by truth, wouldn't you hold that like I don't even know, maybe a theophany or even the revelation itself that precedes the organized scripture, the compilation of the Bible, would actually require something that, now you're using beamed into the mind, right? But as a colloquial thing, like to make it sound silly, but wouldn't revelation itself and miracles and how the faith was delivered, enslaved by truth historically, wouldn't it supersede just pure rationality and reasoning? Wouldn't it be almost nearly equivalent to, in a sense, you're using hyperbole, beamed into one's mind? I mean, because autonomy, like he just explained, would be that you're alone using your own faculties alone, but you're not discerning anything. You're just like, you're using your own autonomy and reasoning as the ultimacy to ground all the things you come to the conclusion of. Well, we can demonstrate that that's just not true ever, even if you thought it was the case, because we would establish that knowledge. Would you agree that we would establish that knowledge is theory laden? That you're already relying on something outside of.
But I want to make
your own reasoning. Good.
I want to make a qualification that I never said you can't know things. That's why I said it's giving an account, a consistent, coherent, and non-contradictory, consistent account that would actually be able to justify that knowledge exists, how it happens, etc. So that's why God's not beaming stuff into your mind at a first order knowledge. Like, right. I think the atheist knows, unless there's something going wrong with the brain or conditions, then knows there's a tree in front of them. That's a big difference than, but how do I justify that at a second order or a meta epistemological order? You can't do it, is what our point is. And in fact, what we're saying is if the necessary condition weren't God, a personal creator who creates the world he has an intention, right? So behind everything, the epistemic principle that we're appealing to, we put faith in to ground our epistemology, is there's intention behind why are the laws the way they are? Why are the regularity of nature? Why is there identity over time, right? Why are all these things such that I could actually have knowledge? We'd say, well, because there's intention behind that. The opposite category is there is no God. There is no intention. So that's that the literal definition of not intentionalism is accidentalism,
which is I've been working on. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's a defeater. If that world were possible, no knowledge would be possible. That's right. What we're actually saying.
Yeah, because you're reasoning, like Bonson would say, you have accidental reasoning. Like you're literally the thing that's doing the reasoning about past, present, future, logical, math, anything you claim, all evaluations. If those things are accidental, they're, at the myopic level, your own reasoning would be accidental. But I also bring this up is that accidentalism, as it's described, you can't even use the word accident without assuming some missing of an intent. So it's kind of like a
that's
fun
their
trap.
argument. So there was this proto-evolutionist called Empedocles that basically said, well, everything's just chance and accident. It's how all the four elements just kind of combine, and that's what you get. So then Aristotle does this analysis that's really good. He says, well, what do we mean by that term? Which is exactly what I do with what does accident and knowledge mean? And he says, well, let's just use a kind of common language kind of analysis of what I mean by chance or accident. So let's say, and I'll just kind of update it for modern. I get my paycheck, which I did right here. See that? And now I've got money, but I got to do different things with that money. One of the things is I've got to I have an intention and goal directed, right? I need to take that to that money and go buy groceries. I also have to pay rent, right? Get gas, etc. Okay, so intention requires a mind. I have in my mind to take this money at this point in time and go get groceries. And then by chance or accident, I run into my landlord. That was not my intention, right? And the money accidentally or by chance goes to my landlord instead of the paying for groceries. So notice there's no such thing as pure chance, pure accident, or it's always defined in terms of the unintended. There was another intention, right, at T2 that I didn't intend and they crossed, right? So my intention was to carry out this goal and then a derivation from that happened, right? So I can only talk about the very meaning of accident, chance in terms of intention. The same way that I would say amputees. I can only define amputee in virtue of biological kind of regularity of somebody that has all their limbs.
And this is not to be confused with an equal balance, like what, because we use the same argumentation for the positive existence, the non-positive existence of, let's say, evil. It's a reference to the privation or missing the mark of what the good is. Same thing with darkness, light, cold, heat. And so people hear this and they go, oh yeah, I totally jive with that, bro. It's an equal balance. It's not this equal balance on a balance beam. One has a positive ontology in existence and one is some sort of missing of that. And so accidentalism is a fun trap because I often take a naturalist and I just go, do you think the universe is intentional or accidental? And not many of them think about it and go, wait, maybe there's a third option. Is this a trap? Well, it is a trap. But I don't know it's a trap you can avoid. That's why I asked you, can we possibly brainstorm any potential third options they could try to come up with? And I think the answer is no, that any third option would lean towards intentional anyway.
Yeah, it's just because they're what we call in philosophy correlatives of opposition, right? So, for example, left and right. Let me think of another example. Pregnant and non-pregnant, or like married man and bachelor. Right? There's no third option because they're defined as correlatives of opposition. So it's not just, well, maybe I missed one and I haven't thought about it, right? They're literally defined that way to be only two options. Now, not everything is two options, but correlatives of opposition are. Opposites are.
defined. So Golden Week wants to
relation to the other.
Yeah, he wants to clarify here. He's saying, well, what is accident?
I don't care.
Yeah, accident. Well, either way, it has the same problem. So if you don't use accident, like if you feel trapped and we give you this dilemma and say, is existence accidental or intentional? And you try to go toward accident, but you don't like the word and you think it's a semantic trap only, you can try another route. If this case, chance is a better word. Chance itself, like randomness, presupposes unordered system that you're deriving such thing called chance. So you can't get probability, for instance, and likelihood without access to certain outcomes that you know exist. So you have favorable outcomes and unfavorable. Well, it happens to be the case that the world has to be a certain type of way for probability to even be possible to come to conclusions about probability. So that's why I said, well, if they try to take a different view that's not accident, and they went with like, oh, it's random chance. Even according to mathematicians, randomness is something that's contrived. It's not an actual thing you can point to in the world. There's no isolated contours of Cartesian space that you can say there's random right there.
Randomness in mathematics are basically like the points off the formula, for example, an exponential logarithmic function or something. So which already implies intelligence and order and understanding.
It's controlled.
Say, well, those things that we say don't fall within the.
Right. Yeah, it's a controlled thing. You just, for the sake of it, you call it, well, we're creating like a random name generator. If I listed all 350 people here and we coded this thing to, quote, randomly select, it's really not random. It's not, we use the term because we know what we're trying to make sense of. It's random, but it's an apparent, it's ostensibly random. It's not actually random. It's very confined.
Yeah, that's what I want to say. Yeah. There's no pure accident, pure chance, or pure randomness. What those terms mean is they already imply not random, not accidental, and not chance.
Right. Yeah. So it's a fun trap.
If you use those, you forfeit it. You've lost the debate because it's like, oh, fantastic, because you already presuppose order, intention, and non-chance.
Right. Object Fool, $20. Thank you very much. It's very generous. Would intention also be another argument for the necessity of truth being a person? Like you said yesterday, objective truth as a person requires mind. Yeah, I'm working on an argument. It's still pretty sloppy, FDA, as far as arguing why it's ultimately incoherent to reduce truth to descriptions of the natural world or effects or whatever, versus how you get to truth as a being, as a person. Now, my routes that I tried to take, and I'm trying to sort of formulate it in a seamless way, is that the absolute truth of the matter of all things would have to include things like mind and person, that it would have to account for like the truth of it all, right? Even as a descriptor would have to include, well, what's the truth of being a person? What's the truth of our mind? What's the truth of gaining knowledge? What's the truth of our purpose? All of these questions, these are mind, these revolve, or the truth of morality even, these revolve around us as unique human beings, specifically, not all creatures, by the way, peculiar to human beings. So I try to make this argument, well, no, Christian has, claim dogmatically that that truth is a person. To know and love the truth, it necessitates a beingness, a person to love, right? You don't love descriptions of things. Like, how could you, now this might be only rhetorical, like how could you love a boiling pot of water in the sense we express love? I love I love that water boils. Like, this all falls apart as far as like trying to tie it to an overall meaning of life or why you're here, like a higher purpose. To love objects, to love effects in the world.
Objects, forms, essences, laws don't have intention. Person, like he's saying, persons have intention.
Right.
So that's why people are saying, well, why can't I just ground this in some type of Neoplatonic theory of forms?
Right.
Is ultimately like, okay, well, they're not even the form of good, which is Plato's God, is personal. So it's non-intentional. What are you going to have to say? You're going to have to actually explain that. The accidental form of the good, accidental necessity. Do you see how these start contradicting? They're oxymoron. You start contradicting.
Yeah. Warsaw says, say I don't believe in epistemology. Well, that would be a contradiction, and view it as a reductionistic ontology. Well, to say ontology, to have a view on that, this is why in general, just a general philosophical take, the moment you refer to something's ontology, you're basically making an epistemic claim. And if you make an epistemic claim, you're making a metaphysical claim. And these things, I think, I don't know, you can give an account of this, FDA, is that when did people start holding the branches of philosophy as assumed to be separate sticks that they found in a forest without necessarily tying them together at the bottom when they start to braid together in a root? How can you pick up a position on metaphysics without assuming the other two, at least one of the branches? How do you go pick up another branch and say, no, FDA, you don't understand. I'm talking about epistemology, not ontology or metaphysics. Well, you know what I mean? Like, you can't really separate these things ultimately.
I know who to blame.
Who did it?
It's Descartes.
Rob?
Descartes, the guy that did this. I mean, he's the first one that basically, well, he put his epistemological cart before nobody really kind of thought about these things. And in some sense, the ancients and the Greeks had kind of more of a cohesive, like holistic account of how these things work. The problem was, but these are a really important question. Like, how do I know? Descartes was the first to do that, but it had consequences. And eventually what happens is it's just a chain reaction in the history of philosophy where each person, the predecessor starts, the one following after, sees, well, there's a problem with that. And eventually people start to say, well, you know what the whole problem is? It's metaphysics. So let's just get
all
rid
this
of
other
metaphysics.
stuff. Yeah.
And we'll just stay within epistemology and language and all this stuff. But you're absolutely right. You can't just say, well, it's just ontology. Because you can just simply ask, well, how do you know that?
Yeah.
And now you're using epistemology.
Right. And then to get epistemology, and then while you're arguing, you're holding, at least without claiming, in a sense, you're practicing a somewhat, hidden meta-ethical position that we're getting to truth. We should pursue the truth. We should get to the bottom of this. The moment you argue, you're kind of doing that. Now, if someone comes to a debate and says, no, there's no reason to come to my side of the view on this, but I'm debating for persuasive reasons, but there's no reason for you to come to my side of things. Like, ultimately, when people argue, they really are participating in some sort of ought, even if it's not explicit, aren't they?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because think about it. So what did this gentleman here that put in the comment? He just says, I don't do something. That's not an argument. But implicit within that, right, he's denying that, well, I'm not giving you a reason for what I'm doing is rational, right? Or you should accept it. But he really is. He's implying that. And so there's a level of, whether consciously or unconsciously, sophistry, right? I'm saying two different things.
Right.
That not even I actually believe or live by.
Right.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
And that's what's part of the Socratic methods to flesh that out, to be like, but you do.
Does ask FDA is if stuff really does come from stuff. Stuff comes from stuff. The best argument. It's my favorite.
The greatest philosophical argument ever made.
Yeah, the biggest ever. Yeah. So that's interesting. That brings me to instead, because people have been beaten down and they're almost tired of hearing necessary precondition for y therefore x. And so, not that it's not a great way to just kind of like come out swinging, but I try to use more of a easier access position. Let me know what you think. Is just, why not just ask at the outset when you're engaging the question, like we just talked about? Why should we come to the truth? Why?
Yeah. I mean, I do that all the time. I mean, look, the only reason why I made those arguments, St. Gregory the theologian says, when speaking to the philosopher, use philosophies. He doesn't really say it, but speak as the philosopher would, that you may win him over. So, I get these requests all the time, like, well, put it in a formal argument, lay it all out, premise by premise, right? And I'm like, I can do that. You want me to do that? Like, that's kind of secondary. And that's why I wrote in my paper too, what all of those people are missing. And it's good to actually take the way that you do, that you just suggested, is those people are missing the epistemological forest for the epistemic trees. They're getting bogged down in the details. I'm like, I can do it. You want me to write it in formal logic, S5 modal logic? Like, I could do that. Yeah. But that's not what the argument depends on.
Right.
It's like me using words or something like that. I'm like, I could do that. And that's why I call it reflexive. It reflects back on something beyond itself, which is in fact what the transcendental argument does. The transcendental, just generally speaking, like Kant uses a transcendental argument to show that there's something that grounds the transcendental argument, all arguments.
The argument for how arguments
beyond itself, right? But you can't get out of using arguments to show what's beyond arguments any more than you can, get out of words to show what ultimately is beyond and grounds words.
Right. And also, if you came to the table and you ultimately thought all of your arguments and evaluations, including the ones your opponent are responding with per your request, please put it in a formal argument. If you really believed that all of those are just epiphenomenal fart sounds coming from the intestines in the skull called the brain, right? Like basically conceptual intestines that produce these things out of the mouth. You really think that there's a need for it to be formal or consistent or non-contradictory?
Why is one thing any better than the other?
Well, like I said, like they still can't deal with this argument. None of the atheists with the big channels who critiqued my first episode could deal with this. The problem is the entailment of the materialistic, physicalist, mechanistic universe, the deterministic view. The entailment is all evaluations and propositions are events. Now, before in my video, I said effects of physics. That's granting way too much. Events, if they're events, then now tell me what you think of this. In order to have some sort of knowledge claim, you do need a distinction between a referent and the reference, the thing, because you got to start describing things and maybe you decide, okay, is that an accurate description? Let's give it more evaluation. Obviously, I don't grant any of that process to the physicalist, but an event, if an event called thinking and coming and evaluating is literally like a puffed up vapor from chemicals, that's a new event. So that's a referent. Now, what I ask someone, and I think it's a decent way of taking their stilts away from them, is that you say, okay, under a physicalist view, because I'm trying to figure out a different attack so they understand this. Under a physicalist determinist view that's purely mechanistic, how do you distinguish between a referent and a reference? Because what I find is every time they say, well, the reference is this description of the thing, right? And I go, great, that defines what it is. But that thing you just referred to is now a new event called the brain, percolating or something, right? So they go, well, then we evaluate. I go, well, that's a new event. That's a new referent. So this is an object or set of objects in the world at the neuro level, the neurological.
So how
level.
are they even connected is what you're saying.
What's the meaningful distinction?
If they are connected,
yeah,
how you know that. And third, that it's a special type of connection. Right? Because not all things connected are reference and reference and refer.
Got you. Yeah, so this is perfect timing. Vesper here, he says he's a monist, physicalist, nominalist, secular humanist, atheist, ready to discuss whatever. Okay, well, that's a lot of those things. It's almost like if you're one of those things, you're all of them. So you probably choose one sometimes. So yeah, well, actually, if you want to respond to what we're saying right now, Vesper, this argument is under a physicalist view. Forget nominalism and the philosophy of it. Just pure physicalism. Would you agree that evaluations themselves are events, physical events?
Yeah.
Okay. And so if there's a physical event out there in the world, I like to use a hurricane. You'd say Okay, there's an event. It's an effective cause. It's an effective physics, right? It can't be right or wrong, correct? A hurricane.
Right. It's a mind independent, you know, empirical.
A mind independent event, right? Okay, so but if you're from your view, what's happening in the mind is just a different organization or behavior of molecules and matter in motion, then isn't that also just an event?
Yeah.
Okay, so how would you determine that that second thing called the event in your brain is not a mind independent event itself? Because now you have to extrapolate the evaluator from that event. So but under your view, is the mind itself, what you call the mind itself, an event?
Sure.
Okay, so now you have two events in pure physical space, right? Of a
Well,
hurricane.
I would say there's one event occurring in a monistic sense.
Right. There's only one big event, right? So you can't separate any universal positions on
Right.
the system you're looking at, right? That's why you're not a nominalist.
It would just be an abstraction.
Okay, so if it's just an abstraction, right? So how would you even why would you even say a mind exists if all you really have is a giant machine?
Well, it's an abstraction also.
But isn't the external world an abstraction?
I wouldn't say so.
Wait, the external world is not an abstract reference to objects in space?
What do you mean?
So when you say the external world out there, right? There's an external world out from your observation, right? There's this out there-ness called the external world.
Yeah,
Okay, is that an abstract or is that a particular thing?
that's abstract.
Okay, so does that exist?
I would say so, yeah.
So the abstraction called out there in the world, the physical reality, you're saying
Well,
that exists, but it's abstract, right?
I mean, the abstraction is based upon empirical experience.
Wait, but your experience is a bunch of particulars, right?
It doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, I'm just asking, is your experience derived from a bunch of unrelated particulars?
Unrelated. Everything's related.
Well, no, just an object in space isn't actually, you couldn't derive the relation from the object itself. It doesn't tell you the relationship to the other objects, right? Like a set of trees, there's nothing in one tree that tells you the information about the rest of the trees you're putting into a category called a set of trees, right?
Right. Those are just particulars with shared.
Right.
with
That's why I
shared
say
attributes.
that's why I say they're unrelated ultimately on their own.
Unrelated in a categorical sense, you're saying.
Yeah, so that's
In a
why I
universal
say,
sense.
yeah, if you were to maintain, so do you from a nominalist position, you hold that universals themselves have no real existence, right?
Right.
Okay. And is there anything that does have a real existence?
The natural world.
I know, but that natural world is a universal claim about particulars. So you just said the
No, not
natural
necessarily,
world.
No.
Well, so that's why I asked you, would you say if you think universals don't have an actual existence, would you say the only thing that does are particulars?
The only thing that exists is the one natural world from a monistic
Right, but
physical.
right,
perspective.
but the thing is,
particulars are just abstractions.
right, but are particulars are abstract too?
Yeah.
So, but when you say the natural world as this unified singular thing, isn't that now a new particular, or is that a universal?
Say that again.
When you say the whole world as one monistic ball of chemistry or whatever
Yeah.
you're referring to, a giant mechanism, that has contours to it now. Is that fine? Is like a finite thing?
I don't posit that the universe is finite now.
Okay, but what are you referring to then as the universe, if not an item, or just the abstract collection of unrelated items? You have to choose.
I mean, why do you have to separate things into categories?
Well, because
You don't have
if
to do that.
It did.
well, you did. Well, you're doing it by saying there's a thing called the universe. We're asking you, are you just using an abstraction? Because I asked you, do universals actually exist? You said no. I said, do particulars actually exist? You said no. They're abstractions as well. I said, what does exist? You said the universe. I asked you,
Yeah.
is the universe a particular thing that you're referring to?
No, it's all encompassing. It's one thing. uni.
It's one thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so is there something that's not that thing?
No. The universe is defined as all that exists.
Okay. So that's why I ask you, how would you categorize that one thing? Is it a particular thing or is it a universe? Is it a universal thing? Are there other of it? Are there other of it?
I guess you could say that it's a universal, sure.
Okay, so you do believe in the actuality of universals. That would be a
But it's just
contradiction.
it's not a mental construct. I mean, it's a physical reality rather than a mental construct.
There's no for a normal.
That's the
I don't think
that's
for
what I wanted
anybody
to
there's a
explain.
physical reality that of universal. Like you don't step in all or the average taxpayer or something like that.
Well, I wanted to explain how a nominalist is talking about universals, how it's different. It's
But then,
not-
but
it's
most
not a platonic
nominalists,
form, right? It's not a.
but
coming from
most
this
nominalists say
realm.
particulars actually exist, and I don't think you could say the universe exists if you deny that all the particulars. Like if
Well,
you said,
abstractions exist, right?
I don't understand, but if you say the universe exists, and I say, what does it consist of? You're going to say abstractions.
Well, it's material.
That's an
physical
abstraction.
reality.
I know, but that's an abstraction. So material reality,
No,
like a
it's
tree.
It's direct reality.
Well, no, you don't.
Empirical.
Yeah, but those are
observation.
categories. Those are still categories. So I'm asking you a question. Like, so if you say universals
Wait,
don't
how
actually
is
exist,
direct empirical experience a category?
where do you find empirical experience out in the world as a thing?
It's occurring in our.
No,
sensory
I didn't ask you
experience.
if you think it's happening. I said, where is it as an actual thing that you can point to and hold in the world? Empirical experience.
Through our senses. What do you mean?
What?
It's in our senses.
Our senses? No. Where is empirical, the term empirical analysis evaluation found in your senses? Which sense is that?
It's all of them. What do you mean?
What do you
It's a
mean? Which one?
function of the senses.
Is all of them? So empirical analysis, the analysis is identical to the senses?
Oh, you mean that analysis about the empirical experience?
Well, you'd need that to make your claim, right? It wouldn't just be the senses,
in
or
order
else
to make
we.
claims about it, sure.
Okay, so you're saying the external world that you're sensing with your senses, right,
Mhm.
is the only real thing there is.
Right.
Okay. Now, do you sense particulars?
I sense a universal, a one universe, right?
Okay, so
Interconnected,
you're not
interconnected.
okay. So here we go. You deny that the universals actually exist, but you actually sense them.
I mean, we're calling it a universal, right?
Okay, so if universals don't actually exist, what is it you're actually sensing with your senses?
The oneness of reality.
Where's the one? Wait a second. So, okay, now you're back to the oneness of reality. Is that composed of a bunch of particulars, or just you have access to the whole thing as one sense?
What do you mean?
You said you're sensing the universe as a whole thing, right? I'm saying,
Yeah.
is that a collection, like induction, like a bunch of senses of different things that you add into a big folder called the universe? Or do you sense the wholeness of the universe directly as one thing?
It's direct experience.
So you have direct experience to the wholeness of the universe.
Yes.
How?
Gnosis.
Is gnosis? Is there anything in the universe you don't have access to seeing, smelling, tasting, holding, weighing?
Say that again.
Is there anything that exists in the universe that you don't have direct access to your senses?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Is there anything that exists in the universe that you don't have access to through your senses? Distance, because it's a distance issue or a perception issue or whatever.
There's things that I haven't experienced in other places.
Okay, so then you don't experience directly the universe.
That doesn't follow.
It does follow. You said universals don't exist. And then I asked you, okay, what exists? You said the universe. I said, do you experience the universe itself through your senses as a whole? And you said yes. And now you said there are some things you don't experience directly in the universe. So you're doing a lot of contradictions.
That's through sense data, right?
That's
I don't have to
that's
make
your
any
method for no, dude, that was your method for knowing the external world is all there is this oneness, right? I said, how do you know that? You said through your senses.
Well, that's knowing how reality exists, right? And
Oh, now, okay, now you're
something.
okay,
Right?
hold on. Oh, well, no, oh, you're gonna go to the Cogito. Would you like to take over FTA on the Cogito?
So
By the way,
it's self-evident through
funny
experience,
that
right?
guess what we did in epistemology class today? Sense datum theory. And so I find that a lot of people like the atheists who use emergent properties don't actually know what that theory is, what's actually sense data is. And so we were going over this. Sense data isn't anything what you were saying. If you look at the sense data theorists, you'll see that all of that, what that term means is sense data is not in material objects. Interesting enough, it's not like Cartesianism, it's not in the mind either. And we went through a whole all the arguments today from the sense datum theorists sense datum theorists believe that the first and most immediate thing that you experience is sense datum. And guess what? That is not the material world. In fact, the sense datum theory. So if you're appealing to sense data, it actually refutes your position, because the sense datum theorists all say that you never experience the external material world.
Well, you need a physical apparatus, the senses, right, in order to have that sense data to begin with.
Yeah, but no. What do you need to evaluate it? Well, that doesn't follow. But what do you need to evaluate the sense data?
You actually just quoted Descartes. Descartes' whole project is based on the assumption of getting to these knowledge claims on the assumption there is no physical brain, physical world, anything external.
Well, also the other problem you have is that for you to do analysis evaluation of the sense data, which FTA just explained, that the thing you're perceiving and interpreting is not identical to the data. The data doesn't tell you how to interpret it, right? So you would say your mind, which you can't justify under your view, but we'll grant it for the sake of argument. Your mind, would you agree, is an observer, an evaluator of the sense data?
Sure.
Yeah, but under your view, you just explained that the mind itself is a set of new epiphenomenal events percolating from the brain, right? So that itself is now a new sense that needs an evaluator. So if the mind itself is also new data in the world as physical objects or the collection of molecules, if the mind, what you call the mind, is that under physicalism, which it is, then you need an observer to observe that sense data, because that's new data now.
Sure.
So what's doing it? Peer review? What, dude? Yeah. Dude, what?
Otherwise, you don't know if your senses are
reliable. Dude, you don't understand what you don't understand what just happened here. Look, under your view, the mind, the thing that's evaluating, that includes the people who are doing peer review, but the mind that you call the mind is a physical epiphenomenal effect of the brain. That means that's producing new events in the world. The new events in the world is the new data in the world. So now you need a mind to evaluate your own, quote, mind, which is now reduced to new data in the world. So I'm asking, under your view, no peer review, this applies to them too. When you interpret what you call your mind, you need another mind now to interpret it, because it's now just pure sense. It's just data.
Yeah, it is like a sixth sense, but you're also using reason.
Well, no, that's the thing in question. Using reasoning.
Abstract system.
No, listen. Under your view, reasoning is also the percolation of some vapor from the brain, producing new data as material in the world. That's what evaluation is to you. Yeah. So if that's the thing you're using to evaluate, what you're saying is there's matter, pure data, matter, evaluating other matter. Is that what you're saying?
Sure.
So which matter properly evaluates other pure matter?
That's a good question.
Well, that's a question you can't answer under nominalism under your view, because you don't have an actual mind distinction from matter. Like for what before you came on, do you know the difference between a referent and a reference?
Explain to me.
Okay, a referent is like an object or set of events in the world, the thing you're pointing to. And the reference is your description of it, how you're referring to it, right? In language or whatever, categorizing it, whatever, describing it. Now, when you do evaluation of things, let's say there's things happening out there in the world, and you call those a reference, and you're going to use a reference to describe those things, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, in your
experiences rather than abstract universes.
Hold on. The answer is just yes. So the problem with your view is that the thing you're calling a reference now, the thing that's referring to the objects in the world, propositions, making statements about it, that thing under your view is now a new referent, a new set of events as physical molecules in the world. Okay.
Right.
So how do you make a distinction under your view between, how do you know the difference between a referent and a reference if everything you call a reference is a new referent in the world?
How do you make a distinction?
Yeah. How do you know the difference between a referent, which is doing the observing of a referent, but under your view, the reference, the activity of evaluating and doing propositions, is itself a new event that needs to be looked at? So who's looking at this new event if it's just matter in motion?
Who's looking at it?
You chat GPT?
I'm just thinking.
Got that chat GPT up?
I mean,
you got that chat?
Isn't
Get that chat up?
Separation, right?
Well, do you understand that in order to have some sort of knowledge or position, even on unsensed data, as FDA said, that you're going to need an evaluator and an interpreter? The problem under your view, what you call an interpreter isn't really a you or a mind. It's a set of events that's produced by a machine called the brain. So when I asked you, what's the difference? How do you make a distinction? You said, that's a good question. The answer is, you're going to have to get back to me. I guarantee you won't be able to get back to me on this question. It's a defeater to your position.
What's the question again?
The question is, how do you determine the difference between a referent and a reference? Or put differently, how do you distinguish the evaluator you call the mind from the thing you also call the mind, which is a set of material activity, just material activity? You need an evaluator of the material activity. But in your view, the evaluator is material activity. So the question was, how do you know which material, pure material, is evaluating the pure material? How does pure material evaluate pure material? And how do you know whose pure material is right? But not only that, it's not even who. You don't even have a who under your worldview. You have a bunch of whats. You have a bunch of objects, right? One what, right? Under one what? How could you possibly say under one what that everything is one thing, but then make these distinctions between propositions about things, right? It's all one thing. You can't even make the distinction between one thing and the other.
Abstraction, because abstraction is simply collapsed back into the thing that you abstracted from. So there is no abstraction,
right?
There is no particulars,
right?
If you're a monist, right? And certainly, even if you did say there is no one particular or referent that's any more privileged than anything else.
Yeah, they're all arbitrary ultimately.
So all of so monism. Yeah.
So my argument my argument saying your argument is just as equal in your worldview as your argument that my argument's wrong. Well, and so you forfeit the debate at that point, which is
an abstraction is only as good as the empirical experience is relating to.
Oh, now you're introducing another separate.
Yeah.
You're
also,
you don't allow in your system.
Yeah. You're asking even. Even if you use the term relations, you're actually appealing to relations to things, which again brings into evaluation, which is canceled out in monism, as FDA just said. It's all arbitrary, and there's no real relations. There's no real distinctions or particulars or relations between particulars. It's all one thing. If all is one, right? All is one, bro. If that's the case, any claims about reality, propositions about relations between particulars, how things operate, how things don't operate. This is illusory. There is no thing out there called a particular operating a certain way because it's all one thing. You can't distinguish little things at the myopic level from things at the macro level because it's all one big machine, which makes ultimately makes
reality, right?
Well, ultimate reality is as an abstraction you don't have access to under monism. Do you understand that? Reality,
it's not an abstraction.
No, it is an abstraction. What is reality? Can you step in it?
It's
yes or no? No. I didn't say how you know it. I said, can you step in reality?
No, because you're already there.
You're already there. So you're already at the truth then too. No need to do any inquiries or argumentation. You're already there. There's no separation between anything from your view. So there's no separation between minds and propositions. In fact, they're all one thing. What's the difference between my proposition and your proposition?
Yours is based upon different empirical experience.
No, they're the same thing.
There's no such thing as difference in your world.
There's no difference under monism.
We say
difference is an abstraction.
Abstractions are useful, right?
There's no difference between abstraction and non-abstraction in your view.
Yeah, there's no difference.
The whole thing is self-refuting, right?
There's no difference. There's no difference. Hey, there's no difference between useful and not useful.
Abstraction exists as part of the whole.
No, that none of that. There is no
separation, right?
I know, but that means there's no usefulness or not usefulness.
That doesn't mean that abstractions don't exist. It just means that they're part of the
in
whole.
Your worldview, it does. Not my world. Like, I have an account for this.
Yeah.
In your monism, it's all collapsed in abstraction is non-abstraction. Distinctions are no distinctions. Your position and my position is my position.
It's all one thing.
It's all self-refuting.
Give me your money is my money. If I rob you, I rob myself.
Reference to something in empirical reality.
But no, you don't have access to references because that assumes a particular mind that's observing something which you deny under monism.
A particular mind.
A particular mind is required in a view to say, oh, I'm referencing the external world. You're saying there's no difference between the mind and the external world because it's all one thing. What is this thing you call a reference, right? Nothing. Alter Void, $10. Question, if there is even a mind, quote, then what is the opposite of a mind and the anti-mind? You can't answer that with an atheist. I'm not sure. I'd like to explore what that question actually means. We didn't say there's an opposite of a mind, I don't think. There would be an opposite of the mind. Anyway, I'm at 346.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'll give you the last word, Moniz.
Bob.
It looks like, I don't know.
First, we have to define what a mind is.
This is what anti-mind looks like.
A mind, we've already defined what a mind is. It's no different than everything else in your view.
Well, what is it happening? What is it in physical
including
reality? It's one reality.
Under monism, it is physical. It is the physical reality. There's no distinction.
Yeah, it's cognitive.
No. There's no cognitive, non-cognitive. There's only
it's not a supernatural thing.
Well, what's information? Does that exist under your view?
That's a good question. What is information?
Information, as it goes today under the theorists would say data plus semantics. Do you think information exists actually or doesn't really exist?
As an abstraction, yeah, it exists.
How does what's the ontology of an abstraction under your view?
The ontology, it's all part of the one thing.
I know, but how does it exist? What's the nature of its existence?
It's a mental construct.
Well, that's a physical object, right? Under your view?
Yeah.
So how is a construct different than a piece of material?
In a particular way in
okay.
brain, right?
Do you understand that when you say something? No. Do you understand something? Is that if you say an abstraction exists, right, but not materially, and I say what's an abstraction, and you say it's
materially.
Okay, so there's no such thing as an abstraction under your view. So why are you saying abstractions don't exist?
No, they do exist.
Okay, does information exist? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, how does information exist? In what way?
As an abstraction.
Are abstractions under your view physical?
Yes.
So why are you making a distinction between abstract and concrete if abstractions are concrete under your view?
Because it's useful for language, right?
No, no, no,
Language
no.
operates using
No, no.
abstraction.
What's useful isn't what's in question. It's if it's a you're violating the law of identity. Like you're collapsing categories here. There's no point in saying abstract, which habitually is referred to as non-concrete, right? Immaterial, non-concrete. You're saying information exists in an abstract way, and I say, what's abstract under your view? Guess what? It is not abstract.
Yeah, it's concrete.
So why are you saying the term
Everything's
abstract?
concrete.
So then why are you saying the term abstract? So then if
So
information,
you know what I'm talking about.
okay, no, I don't, because
It's a
you're
mental
using,
construct, which is
how am I
ultimate.
supposed to know what you're talking about if you're using categories you deny? So listen, if
Yeah.
information is concrete, please point to a thing, a piece of matter that's identical to the information we assign to it. Any example will do.
Say that again.
If information is concrete, give me one example of a concrete object that's identical to the information we assign to it.
Material reality is the concrete object.
What?
Physical material reality is the concrete object.
That's a okay. So am I always engaged with that or what?
Yes.
Okay. So what's the information? Where is it? Where is it? Another piece of information? Because you're saying material reality. What is material
So there's no
reality composed of?
separation.
What's material reality composed of?
Atoms. Subatomic
Atom.
particles.
Okay, so now you have a particular called atoms. Now, can you point to an atom that has the information atom in the atom?
No.
Okay, so then your
It's an emergent-
statement.
It's a collective of atoms.
Well, no.
Like
Now you
every
contradict
abstract.
yourself. No, you said information's concrete. I asked for an example. You said the material reality. I said what's it composed of? Particular atoms. I said the term atom, right, is a piece, that's information, right? That's data. That's semantics added to data. I asked you, can you locate the meaning, the information atom in the atom? And the answer is no. Just the same way you can't find the information tree inside a tree. You can't find the term apple inside an apple. So immaterial information actually debunks your whole view. Now, you're